We are gathered here today on Yom Kippur, our day above all for teshuvah, translated as repentance, but based, of course, on the root lashuv, to return, to come back. So as long as we're all sitting here together, I ask that you join me for a little journey. If you would, indulge me in some sentimentality as we take a few moments to return to our younger days. Take a moment with me, if you would, and think about the first home of your childhood. Can you picture your bed, your room? Maybe you can picture the kitchen. There's probably some people there, maybe a mother, father, siblings. If you think about that place long enough, there's almost certainly a smell that comes to mind too. Can you find it? For some of us, it is the home that will always be home. When we hear that word, home, it's what pops into our minds. Is it still there? Have any of you been back? Is there another family that has no idea what the place was to you? Take another moment with me. Think about your elementary school. I don't know what yours was like. Mine was built in the monumental style, a giant brick building with steps leading up in the middle, built to last. Looks something like the Hyannis Elementary School here. Embodied, let's face it, my hometown's value of education. I have to say, when I hear the word school, it's still the first image that pops into my head. Can you see the look of the hallways in your elementary school? What the old gymnasium looked like? That, for me, is still school. Take one more step with me and remember the synagogue of your childhood. Mine was a big old house, a converted mansion. I saw Stephanie Panache earlier here. She knows exactly what it looks like. She grew up in the same one. Our sanctuary, I gotta say, was a little bit funky. There were some glass doors to either side that led to the old porches that were off of the big room. Our classrooms were at the top of a grand staircase. They were the old bedrooms. I can still see myself sitting by my parents on a Friday night, balancing the open book on the edge of the seat in front of me. Every week, I made a paper airplane out of the service flyer. It was a challenge. I remember going to the bathroom during the service with a friend of mine, and then we'd always stop on the way to scope out the oneg spread before going back in. Get a reservation for the good brownies. Most of all, I remember the people. The faces of my religious school teachers, the kids I grew up with. So many of the kind faces of the elders of my home congregation, the people I saw on Shabbat and holidays. Bernie, who led services when the rabbi was away. Sylvia's cookies and cakes. Mr. Pressman, who was so happy that I attended his alma mater that I inherited his class ring when he died. So many happy memories. The old building burned down in 1982. Well, it was burnt. And a lot of years have gone since I was a kid. The only way I can visit the temple I grew up in is to remember it. That's where it lives. So many of those people are gone now, but they are there when I conjure them up. And I'm sure as I speak these words, many of you can do the same thing. So as we sit here together on Yom Kippur, I hope that many of those old memories are here with you now, that you can feel the presence of all those Jewish pasts and all of your loved ones still sitting with you. For many of us, Cape Cod Synagogue is the place of our youth, or it is the place where we raised our children. We are the adult faces that make up the memories for another generation of Jewish children. My own children have grown up here and will be forever linked with Cape Cod Synagogue. This is the place that they will think of when they hear the word synagogue. I want you to entertain a terrible thought with me for a moment. What if it wasn't here? What if Cape Cod Synagogue goes the way of a childhood home or an old school? Imagine being the one charged with extinguishing the Ner Tamid and taking the mezuzah off the door. What if, God forbid, this becomes a place only conjured up in memories? It's not my favorite thought, nothing likely to happen anytime soon, chas v'chalila. But there are undeniable trends in the Jewish world, especially in America and especially in the Reform world. Anybody here who grew up in Worcester knows that Temple Emmanuel, once among the powerhouses of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations and then the URJ, is no more. Gone. It's not alone. Congregations are merging and even closing around the country. There are many stories of this. They all have a sad familiarity. There was a story that ran in the New York Times several years ago that struck me. It was about a congregation on Long Island that had merged with another congregation, and they had to close their old home in Farmingdale. The words of one of the members really touched me. Eileen Lamban, age 69, became a bat mitzvah and later married at the Farmingdale Jewish Center. For most of her married life, she and her husband Shlomo sat in the same pew toward the back on the left side of the sanctuary, near the commemorative plaques bearing the names of their relatives. She's reconciled to the move to Wantagh, but cannot avoid tears when talking about leaving her synagogue in Farmingdale, which is locked now, except when real estate agents show it to prospective buyers. When I sat in that temple, I could see my grandfather and my husband, she said. Both are dead. Peak Jewish population in the United States was back in the 1950s. We were around 7.5 million. Like every other ethnic group in the U.S., the pull of assimilation is strong. We now number somewhere between 5 and 6 million, depending on which survey you ask and how you count. It's remarkable, frankly, that we have maintained ourselves as strongly as we have for so many generations. And for many years, the Reform movement was growing. Yes, it was growing. It's a true statement, but with a few provisos. Many of our members didn't grow up in the Reform movement. We've been a magnet for those who grew up in the conservative movement and even some who grew up traditionally or Orthodox. The United Synagogue, the governing body for conservative Judaism in America, has already hit the demographic wall, and going forward, not likely to be a huge source of Reform Jews in the years ahead. As a movement, they have already shrunk by over a third. As was revealed at the 2013 URJ Biennial in San Diego in announcing the campaign for youth engagement, only 25% of the kids growing up in our congregations affiliate as Reformed Jews as adults. Compared to other religious streams, that's actually not so bad, but you get my point. The average age of a person who is a member of a URJ congregation is 54 years old. Our average fertility rate is 1.3 children per woman. Now, you can see the point I'm making. None of this is shocking. It only confirms what we can see with our own eyes. We look around and it becomes obvious. Our affiliation and religiosity, in fact, reflects larger American trends. Let me tell you a story. I attended the CCAR convention in Philadelphia a few years ago, and waiting at the airport for a ride, I ran into another rabbi I know, who shall remain nameless, but who was a macher in the movement, who told me the story of his own children. And he said, I did everything. I was involved in the movement my entire life. My children attended religious school. They went to camp. They went to Israel. They've married Jews. And chances are they'll never join a synagogue, because that generation is not joining synagogues. So what can we do? First, I think it is maudlin and pointless to cry for what was. We are here now, and we must embrace our reality. We who are the current generation cannot be caught in pointless laments. It is powerless, right? We have no ability to turn back the clock or change larger social trends by ourselves. It's a nice thing we don't have to. In fact, here at Cape Cod Synagogue, we can revel in what we have. Look around you. We have a beautiful community filled with committed and caring people. We are a center for Jewish life that has thrived for more than 80 years on Cape Cod. Now, in our time of strength, we can act. But to do so, we need to look realistically at the trends and plan for our future. Cape Cod Synagogue, in many ways, is pretty amazing. We do more with less. Similarly sized communities in our region of the country have budgets that range from half again to twice as big as ours. That's typical. Yes, we're operating somewhere between half and two-thirds of what other synagogues do. I have had colleagues gasp when I told them what our annual budget was. The only reason we can do this is because our volunteers are so amazing. And without you, we would have nothing. In my years here, we have cut back everywhere we can to stay within our means. I've changed health insurance 5 times in 11 years to find savings for the synagogue. We've invested in a solar project, building for our future, counting on the fact that we will not have an electric bill for 20 years. Some cuts have been truly painful, letting go of our religious school director because of shrinking enrollment and budget. It hurts. The only significant cuts left in our budget are right in front of you right now. It's Jennifer and me. Cape Cod Synagogue is, in the words of Milton Penn, a monument to Judaism on Cape Cod. We are heading towards our 100th anniversary. What do we want that monument to look like for our next century? Will it be backwards looking, dedicated to what was? Or will we make it more like the Lincoln Monument, a gathering place for the committed that constantly renews its purpose? We can count on a different kind of Jewish community emerging in the years ahead. The Cape is now more than ever a retirement community. We count on our vacationers and tourists to keep the economic pump primed, but our year-rounders are decidedly grayer. Our purpose as a community will be more and more to minister to the needs of our older population. We still have a sacred commitment to our young. As I tell them every year in my 7th grade class, every child is a precious diamond. And we celebrate and applaud those who choose to come to us and live Jewish lives and pass that on to their children. Vishinantam livanecha, you shall teach these words to your children, is as true today as it ever was. We cannot forget that Cape Cod Synagogue convened in 1933 to provide a place to educate Jewish children, and it is still central to our identity. But we must recognize that younger generations are less likely to join and be members of communities. It doesn't mean they're turning their back on Judaism. They still want Jewish experiences. And you know what? It's not just the younger people on Cape Cod who don't join. So many people count on us to be here. You know how many calls I field in Cantor Malin fields for funerals for unaffiliated people? Weddings. Almost every wedding I do is a destination wedding here. It's a good thing I'm here to do them, right? Our Passover Seders. We do a community Seder that's filled with our members, and let's face it, many people from outside of our membership who depend on it being here to meet their needs. Look around you today. We have a lot of people who are not affiliated with the synagogue who count on us to be here for the high holy days. People are looking for spiritual inspiration. They're looking for a rabbi and a cantor to be here. They're just not as inclined to support it as have the past generations. You know, I had a very interesting encounter this summer when Bettina and I were traveling in Israel. I met up with an old friend and his family. He's made Aliyah 6 years ago. He's married to an Israeli woman. We met each other 20 years ago doing the same kind of work, campus outreach. I was on the campus of Yale. He was at Queens College. And he had grown up in the conservative movement. We really locked in because as friends, we had a similar passion for Judaism, the Jewish people, and rock and roll. But he grew up in the conservative movement. He still had his bar mitzvah, a tefillin. He rapped every day, extremely committed, made Aliyah, first moved to kibbutz Yahel, a reformed Jewish kibbutz. And there he was with his children. And he said, he would go on Shabbat, and he was the only one below the age of 60 in the Beit Knesset, in the synagogue. It was only the old-timers in there. Well, after their time and absorption on Yahel, they moved further north, and they settled in, and he was looking for a synagogue. He didn't want an Orthodox synagogue, and so he looked, and the Reformed synagogue near him, again, it was mostly older people. He ended up with a conservative synagogue, a Masorti synagogue. But what he told me was this, and this is what I really found interesting. He says, since we moved here, my children all speak Hebrew. They're learning about the Jewish holidays and the Bible in school. They get Shavuot off from school. I don't have to lift as much as I did. Synagogue membership wasn't as important to him. This guy, a lifelong committed Jew, because he was living it every day. Last I checked, they don't give Shavuot off on the Cape Cod school systems. They don't give Yom Kippur off. We don't have that luxury here. Look, people who are a lot smarter than I am have seen the writing on the wall, and it's very clear. Jewish communities that successfully endow themselves will be secure. It will remove the financial barriers to different kinds of memberships and associations, enabling us to be here when people need us. Those synagogues that don't follow this path will be subject to demographic forces beyond their control. Some, they're in the right zip codes, and Jews are moving there. We cannot pick the congregation up and move it to Florida. Here we are in Cape Cod. I know the category I want Cape Cod Synagogue to be in. Think about our journey for a moment. We started out meeting in a space on Main Street above what is now Bradford's Hardware. I believe it was the Stop and Shop at the time. The founding generation came to this place, and they built what was the original synagogue building in 1949, the Little Red Shul House. Those of you who are sitting in the social hall on that side of the pillars are sitting in what was the Cape Cod Synagogue. Stanley Isaacson is back there. Was right there when he had his bar mitzvah. Is that correct? The first bar mitzvah in the new building. In 1979, the building that many of us are now sitting in was completed. Many of those early generations and those who followed in the 1950s and 60s put in the hours and raised the money to make it possible. The innumerable number of bingo games and fundraisers, both large and small, to make this place possible. Our religious school extension followed in 1980, necessary to educate the Jewish children of Cape Cod. It contains our gem of a Jewish library, the tireless work of Leona Penn and Marcy Berman, who made it what it was and is. This generation now finished our renovation not too long ago, getting ourselves ready for the next century. We fixed what was broken, we tightened up the building and improved its energy efficiency greatly in order to lower our operating costs. Those of us who sit here today do so, as Isaac Newton once noted, on the shoulders of giants. We see further only because of the foundation below us. We owe a profound debt of gratitude for all those who gave of themselves to make and sustain this community. It has been handed to us in sacred trust. This is the place that is filled with the spirit of the Jewish people. This is the place that is filled with the spirit of the Jewish God. That's why I lean, I have to say, towards the traditional end of Jewish practice for a Reform rabbi. Everything that I have seen and everything that I have known is that we are counting on the most committed people in our communities to sustain us. Innovations are wonderful and important, but we can't afford to drift into a Judaism light. We need to keep a core of who we are, to have any kind of a draw, to stand for something, not simply latch onto every contemporary trend. Our foundations must be strong. So let me talk Tachlis here for a second. Linda Arnowit spoke eloquently on Rosh Hashanah in asking us to stand with her, to do one more thing this year, to rededicate ourselves to being a bigger part of Jewish life here on Cape Cod. I'm going to ask you for something else. I thought a lot about what it will take to prepare this community for the years ahead. And let me tell you, this is not about me. Believe it or not, I won't always be the rabbi of Cape Cod Synagogue. I wasn't born with a barcode on my heel saying, go to Hyannis, right? And I do sometimes think about what my successor, whoever she or he will be, will have to work with. I think about the many people in this community who are so dear to me. What and who will be there for them when I can no longer be that person? We have a sacred bond not only with those who came before us, but with those who will come after. So what will it take? I'm going to say a number. 3.5 million. It's a big number. And I have to say, it's not what I would choose to be speaking about on Yom Kippur, but I think it is that important to hear. I know, even now, some of you are asking, how do I make out the check? 2 commas. I'm not a fool. I know this will be a challenge. And I know that some of us can give more than others. But the reality is it's going to take every one of us to make this a reality. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to recommit ourselves, to insulate ourselves against the inevitable changes here on the Cape and in the rest of the American Jewish community. There's something else I know. I know that we can do it. There was a former congregant who came to visit me a few months back on an unrelated matter. And after talking for a few moments, I asked her how her daughter, who had been a student of mine, was doing. And then she began to break down in tears. Her daughter's fine, don't get me wrong. She's grown up now, steady guy, living in New York, everything's going great. Why was she stricken in tears? Because she said on the way into the office she had stopped to look into the sanctuary, and she didn't see her grown daughter. She saw her 7-year-old daughter standing on the bema singing with the youth choir. This is the power of our community. Remember again the synagogue of your youth and the people who were there. In an instant, I am back in mine, giggling in the back row with a Hebrew school buddy. It's the place I returned to when Bettina and I were married. Cape Cod Synagogue is a special place. It contains the intersections of thousands and thousands of people who have come here. If you sit in silence in the sanctuary, you can hear the millions of prayers echoing in this room that have been offered. The web of connections between our generations. The friendships and the joys we have shared because CCS is so strong. And also the tragedies and losses we have found the strength to endure because our community is so strong. We are the generation entrusted with the fate of the Jewish people on Cape Cod. I am not being overly dramatic. Look to your left, look to your right. There is no one else. We're the ones who care enough to be here. Our previous generations look down upon us as we sit here. We are the beneficiaries of all those who came before. What are we going to leave for those who come after? Da lifnei mi ata omed, as it says on the ark. Know before whom you stand. What will we leave for those who come after? I tell you this: when your call comes, answer. Join me in making Cape Cod Synagogue a beacon of Jewish life that will continue to shine for our next century.